This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back. I'm your host, Jackson Neill, here on Friday, July 12th, 2019. Today I'm going to be talking about the NBA and tampering because Adam Silver has had some comments recently referring to the NBA and their quote-unquote tampering problem. But first, I just want to remind everyone that this podcast is available on all of your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. It's also available on JacksonNeillPodcasts.com, the go-to spot for everything that I publish. So recently, Adam Silver has made some comments alluding to the tampering problem that is in the NBA. He didn't necessarily use those words, he used some other words, but that vaguely referred to it. But basically what he said was that the NBA is looking into ways to kind of stop this whole tampering problem that's going on. And when I first saw it, I was relatively confused because this offseason has been incredible for the NBA. For about the past, I would say 8 years or so, ever since LeBron's decision, the NBA offseason has been completely changed with all these free agents moving. And especially, I would say, really start without LeBron going back home to Cleveland. It felt like every offseason after that, there was at least one big-name player on the move. We were always talking about maybe where LeBron would end up, or then it became KD, or now it's LeBron going to Los Angeles, and then other players mixed in around that. This NBA offseason became this thing where all these stars were moving. And this year was no different, except for the fact that it was just bigger and better than ever before. I mean, Kevin Durant switched teams, and that hasn't been a lead story on sports talk radio or sports TV since it happened. Now, not because nobody cares about the NBA, but because other moves were even bigger than that. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving going to the Brooklyn Nets, I mean, you could argue that was the third biggest move of this offseason. Both those guys together. I mean, that whole Anthony Davis trade going to the Lakers and, remodeling that team, and then everything that New Orleans got back and all their draft assets, including getting Zion Williamson in the draft. Then that was pretty big. Then you look at the Los Angeles Clippers, a thing that I've been covering a lot here on this podcast with that whole Kawhi Leonard and Paul George move. And this NBA offseason has just added up to become this crazy event, this crazy time of year. I mean, there is no games being played, but I've never heard the NBA talked about more than this. It felt like once the finals were over, it kicked into high gear. That everyone talked about the NBA more now that the games were over. And it's become this crazy, crazy dynamic, and this year has been just on another level than I would say years past. And Adam Silver kind of referred to that in some comments. The NBA does a very good job of continually releasing kind of commissioner statements that Adam Silver has, kind of updates on what's going on and what they're currently looking at. And one thing they kind of talked about was this whole idea that there's this mass tampering going on in the NBA. And I mean, I don't think it's that hard to tell. Look at the reports surrounding Kawhi Leonard. I had Broderick Turner on my podcast on Wednesday. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend you go and check that out. He kind of talked about and gave some inside knowledge and a little bit of the storyline of Kawhi going to the Clippers. But basically, it kind of boiled down to Leonard. He called up Durant. Durant said, going to Brooklyn. And yeah, two free agents calling up each other, that's not that bad. But Leonard called up Paul George, and George was obviously under contract for several more years for the Oklahoma City Thunder. So it became, and that led to the trade, and it kind of became this thing where a free agent forced a player out of a city, and then, earlier this year, all those things with LeBron and Anthony Davis, and was that tampering? And there's been this whole entire discussion about it, and now Adam Silver's coming out and making comments kind of saying, they're going to look into this problem, and I don't see a problem. I don't see where the problem really lies. Because like I just mentioned, this NBA offseason has been absolutely crazy. And probably towards the height of it all was 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, on Sunday, June 30th. The time that free agency opened, I remember I was sitting on my couch. I had notifications for Woj and Shams on, and they just started flooding in. This free agent here, this free agent there, this free agent there. It was this couple-hour frenzy, even the first hour, this couple-hour frenzy of seeing, oh my God, he's on this team, he's on that team, he's on this team. And obviously, if free agency technically opened at 6, that's when teams were technically allowed to start talking to these players. But if all these deals are getting announced, they obviously were talking to them sooner. I mean, no doubt about it. But that moment of 6 p.m. Sunday was insane. I don't remember ever a time kind of like that where it was like, oh, now this guy's going to this team, this guy's going. It felt like one of those kind of times when you're playing NBA 2K or FIFA and it's on trade deadline day or on the final day of free agency or you're doing a fantasy draft and you're seeing all these guys go to different teams. It was absolutely wild. It was captivating, and it was grabbing my attention at the end of June for the NBA, when they don't even have, when the last game was tipped off a couple of weeks before that. So that was a really cool moment. And then just looking at the rest of this offseason, yes, I know if you're an Oklahoma City Thunder fan, it has to suck if you're losing Paul George. And there's numerous cases of that, but by the same token, if you're a Laker fan, you gotta love that you're seeing Anthony Davis. And in the same trade, if you're a Pelicans fan, you gotta love to see that your team's getting a lot of young stuff back, and then all these other different signings. I mean, the 76ers, I'm recording this podcast in Philadelphia, the 76ers, it was tough to see Jimmy Butler go, but then all of a sudden you see Al Horford signing. So it's a lot of give and take, and I don't understand why this is being looked at as a problem. And why these quote-unquote tampering things are a problem. Players are going to talk. I mean, it's not that difficult. Are you going to consider tampering? I remember on draft night, what was it? Damian Lillard was dropping diss tracks. I think it was the Marvin Bagley. Are you going to call that tampering because two players are communicating, maybe not in the scheduled time for them to do so? Is that tampering? If these guys are best friends, if LeBron and Kevin Durant are friends, I don't know if they are, but if they are, and they send them a text on Christmas, oh, how's the family doing? Is that tampering? I don't understand what the problem with tampering is, that you never really know and understand exactly what the limitations are. And now in today's technological world where everyone has these iPhones and cell phones and smartphones on them, you can't really stop it. And then my next thing would be, okay, let's say you try to stop it. Let's say you try to say, you decided that all these deals being announced at 6 p.m. is a bad thing, that these teams should not be talking to these players until free agency opens, so we're going to solve that. The only logical solution would be you would have to move free agency to right after the finals. Because as soon as the finals is over, that's when all these teams start talking to these players. That's kind of what it's known. So you'd have to move it right up there. Well, if you move free agency to before the draft, okay, so you're going to have to move the draft a little bit back. But if you move the draft a little bit back, you're then going to have to move Summer League back. And now is Summer League getting too close to the preseason? So it becomes a lot of questions, I feel like. And then again, how long would that free agency period before the draft be? There's just a lot of these questions that I don't understand why they're even being brought up. Because as of right now, it looks like a business model. It looks like this business model for the NBA that works and that's getting amazing results. Right now, there's the finals. Obviously, keeps you engaged as a fan. You want to see who wins the championship. Then there's a little bit of a break. It's been a long season. It's taken a lot out of you as a fan to keep up with that. The national media. It gives about the national media maybe like a week break or so. Little stories in there of where's this guy going to go? Where's it going to, what's going to happen? But for the most part, it's kind of a break, and it's kind of a little bit of this lull. It allows fans to kind of rest for about a week, and everyone to take a break from talking about the league for a week. Then the draft happens, and then as soon as the draft happens, people are kind of reeled back in because there's some draft night trades. There's some, the new players entering the league. It's like, oh, okay, the NBA's back in discussion. And then after the draft, it's about then a week or so till free agency opens. In that week, there is just tons and tons of speculation. That's all anybody can talk about. Free agency opens on June 30th now at 6 p.m. Eastern. All these moves are getting announced in the first couple hours, and that first night, it's a frenzy. People are paying attention to your league. People care about it. In the next couple days, people are talking about it. People can't stop talking about it. And while these people are talking, and maybe you have some years like Kawhi Leonard who kind of drags this thing out a little bit longer past July 4th, but for the most part, those first couple of days, everyone sees where they're going, and then for the next week or so, you talk about it. And you're paying attention to the league. And right as, you're starting to kind of maybe trail off a little bit as a fan, it's been about 5 days or so of talking about free agents, NBA Summer League, the Las Vegas edition, that starts up. And there's about then 10 days, a week and a half of that keeps your attention as an NBA fan, because there's players in there like, this year Zion, we didn't get to see Zion, but at least RJ Barrett's there, Taco Fall. I mean, there's the fact that the other night when the MLB, either Home Run Derby or All-Star Game, I think both, honestly, both of those were on. Those are the two star-studded events in Major League Baseball. It's an All-Star Game and a Home Run Derby. Those are big nationally televised events. I was watching Summer League over them. And from judging from the people I follow on Twitter and the conversations I was hearing, I don't think I was that much of an outlier in that. In that Summer League, these games that are meaningless, I mean, I'm going to put it blatantly out there that per game, there's only about one or two guys, maybe two guys you're kind of interested in watching. I would rather watch that than the MLB. And the only reason for that is because you've been talking about the league for so long, about 2.5 weeks or so, by the time you get to Summer League, that you just want basketball to watch. There's just all these conversations, all these predictions you have in your head that even if it's just these guys who won't make the roster and draft picks battling it out on a Las Vegas court in some gym on some ESPN stream, or even now they're nationally televising that, you're going to watch. Fans are going to care. Fans are going to pay attention. So it's a model that's not broken, that's getting great results. Maybe the commissioner's office and Adam Silver only released this statement because they wanted to look like they're trying to address a problem without really addressing it. But from my point of view, there is no problem. The NBA offseason is perfect just the way it is. And that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on your favorite platforms, because that does a lot to help grow the show. Remember, new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For more episodes, go down into the show notes and visit the link to jacksonneillpodcast.com. There you'll find all of the episodes to this sports podcast, as well as the Jackson Neill Music Podcast and my interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill. New episodes of the Music Podcast on Sundays, with Anything Goes coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you're a big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber on Patreon. For just a couple dollars a month, you can get access to bonus segments from both my sports and music podcasts, as well as bonus content from my interviews on Anything Goes. I write, record, and produce these podcasts myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support really does go a long way. Link to Patreon down in the show notes. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, @JacksonNeil20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.